The season of Epiphany is bookended by two incredibly dramatic, powerful encounters with the divine. The first happens at Jesus' baptism, when the clouds were rent asunder and God declared, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And then we have today's mountaintop experience, where Jesus, along with Peter, James, and John, hear almost the exact same words once again. "This is my Son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased." But this time, there's an additional stinger at the end. Listen to him. Just in case that wasn't clear the first time around. These kind of events are referred to by biblical scholars as theophanies. And the word theophany, which is the singular, comes from two Greek words. Theos, which means God, and phanein, which means to show, or to bring to light, or manifestation. And so when you put those two together, you get a manifestation of God, a moment in time where God is seeable and hearable. Theophany has the same root word as epiphany, which we usually translate to be that aha moment. But given the fact that epi means from above, more literally it means to bring to light from above. And so the fact that Epiphany has two theophanies means that this whole season is about things being brought to light, which again is very fitting because light is one of the major themes in the season of Epiphany. We started everything off with the three wise men following the light from the star. Last week we heard about how we are called to be salt and light, or salty and lit, depending on which side of the bed you wake up in the morning. And then in today's story, we see Jesus transfigured, taking on the appearance of dazzling light. Light illuminates, it reveals, it affects how we perceive things, which is something that I learned firsthand as a kid when we were playing tour guide to some family friends that were visiting from out of state. As many of you know, my parents and I moved to California when I was about 5 years old, and we were the first in our family to live, really this side of the Mississippi. And so in those first few years, we had a lot of people come visit, which meant that we became very experienced tour guides. Nelson Family Tours hit all the highlights. Golden Gate Bridge, Ghirardelli Square, Fisherman's Wharf, Pier 39, Lombard Street, Sutro Baths, the cable cars, you name it, it was on one of our routes. Now, that being said, the one landmark that I can only remember going to once in all of those visits from family and friends was Alcatraz. Probably because it's such a pain to get there if you've ever been. But the one time that we did go, it left quite the impression. Now, part of the tour is self-guided. You have those headphone things where you punch in the number that's on the plaque of whatever you're standing in front of, and then the pre-recorded voice starts repeating some facts about that for you. But there was another part that had a live tour guide who took us to see, among other things, the solitary confinement cells, which had no windows and no lights. So once you were locked in there, you were in absolute and complete darkness. Prisoners would smuggle in small rocks or balls that they would throw in the dark and then shuffle around trying to find, just so that they would have something to do to pass the time. And the guide crammed about 15 of us into one of those cells and then closed the door. Not to be dramatic, but hearing the click of that lock and seeing that last sliver of light disappear, it was a kind of haunting experience. And when he finally opened the door, he asked us to guess how long we all thought it had been. To me, it had felt like an eternity. But as a group, we kind of all agreed that it had probably been about 5 minutes. In reality, it had only been 60 seconds. Light is so important to how we as humans perceive and receive things, which is probably why there's such a strong connection between light and the divine. In the gospel story for today, Jesus takes a select few of his disciples up the mountain when suddenly he is transfigured. We're told that his face shone like the sun, and that his clothes became as bright as pure light, and that the disciples could see him talking with Moses and Elijah, two of the most important figures in the Old Testament, the human embodiments of the Torah and the prophets. And then Peter. Good old Peter, whose motto in life seems to be ready, fire, aim, speak first, think eventually, blurts out, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let me build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah, because I know you guys are going to want your own personal space, but then we can just stay here in this glorious moment forever." And it's easy, to roll our eyes or to laugh at Peter for being ridiculous, for missing the point yet again, but in his defense, there was some precedent to his suggestion. In our first reading that we heard from Exodus, we heard about how Moses ascended Mount Sinai for a tete-a-tete with God. And in that meeting, God gave Moses all sorts of instructions, but chief among them was a detailed step-by-step guide for how to build the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was a large, sacred tent/dwelling place that was used by the Hebrew people as their primary place of worship, from Moses' time all the way up until Solomon's temple was built in Jerusalem. But in addition to being used for worship, it was also created to house the Ark of the Covenant, the box containing the tablets with the 10 Commandments. The one that melted off the faces of all those Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then also inspired that fan theory that questions whether or not Indiana Jones's actions have any real impact on the story. We can debate that after church if you're interested. But when it comes to the design of the tabernacle, all I can say is that God must have been watching a lot of HGTV, because the instructions for that thing take up nearly 3 full chapters. The poles need to be made of acacia wood with a pure gold overlay. There needed to be this many cherubs in this posture, and then this many cherubs in that posture. There's like 10 whole verses on how to make the lampstands, and then another 15 verses on how to make the curtains. Now, to be fair, it's understandable why God would have so many precise specifications, because this was not just any old tent. This tabernacle was meant to represent God's physical presence among the people. It was meant to serve as God's dwelling place. And so, Peter wasn't entirely off base when, after seeing such clear and indisputable evidence of Jesus' divinity, he suggested that they build him a tent. As I said before, there was solid precedent. But while we're on the topic of tents, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the beginning of the Gospel of John, which contains that famous verse, "And the Word became flesh and lived among us." The verb that we translate as lived among us is the same word that is used for, you guessed it, setting up a tent. Who knew that God loved camping so much? Now, only in this instance, instead of being this massive tabernacle tent, God's new tent, God's new way of being present in the world would be through Jesus. Jesus would stand as a testament to the fact that God isn't just up there somewhere, but has in fact stooped low and entered into our world. This new tabernacle of God would be made not from wood and canvas, but from flesh and bone, the very same things that you and I are made of. Quite a humble dwelling place for the divine to inhabit, which was by design, because it was meant to demonstrate that Jesus was sent to be among God's people, present in the everydayness of life. But it doesn't stop there, because in addition to telling us that Jesus is God made flesh, the beginning of John's gospel also tells us that in him was life and light. A light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. We will say those words every week during our Holden evening prayer service during the season of Lent, and they are words that contain so much hope and promise. And yet, they can also feel a little empty and hollow to us at times. Times of personal grief and loss, times of wilderness where we feel lost, unsure of where to go or what to do, times when it seems like the stories of hate and fear vastly outnumber the stories about hope and light, times like the ones that we find ourselves in today, where we are in desperate need of the light and life that is found in our Savior Jesus Christ. And so where are we to look when we are in search of that light and that life in our lives? Well, just like in our story for today, that light can shine through in some pretty unexpected places and unexpected ways. Most recently for me, I saw it in this year's Super Bowl halftime show. There was a lot of controversy leading up to it. I saw one pretty funny influencer on Instagram who suggested that Bad Bunny should invite Bruce Springsteen and that they could open with Born in the USA. Since Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, it would have been fitting. But Benito didn't go for any such gimmicks. He stayed true to who he was and celebrated where he came from. Not surprisingly, my 3 years of high school Spanish and the 2 semesters I took in college did not stand up to such rapid translation needs. But I also think it's a good thing, to put ourselves in those situations from time to time. They stretch us out of our comfort zones, which in turn helps build our empathy muscles. And the beautiful thing about the language of art is that it is universal. The show was a celebration of the light and the life that is embodied in that culture, and you didn't need to understand Spanish for that to shine through. The set design celebrated the ordinary, the humble, the mundane, everyday things of life in Puerto Rico, from the sugarcane fields to a shave ice truck to a small family home to a joyful and, might I add, real wedding ceremony. Now, I am by no means trying to say that Bad Bunny is equatable to Jesus, but what I am trying to say is that the halftime show contained a lot of the same aspects that our Transfiguration story for today has. Light, life, and most importantly, love. The very last thing that was displayed on the Jumbotron at the end of the show were those words: "The only thing more powerful than hate is love." And with all of this conversation about light, I couldn't help but draw a connection to the immortal words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Jesus enters our world as the light, life, and love of God embodied, made flesh. God tears open the heavens not once but twice to declare as much. And this light is most certainly not meant to be hidden under a bushel or housed in a tent on top of a far distant mountain, because Jesus was given to us out of love to guide us, to show us how to live and be and act in the world so that the light of God might shine through each one of us as well. And all we have to do is listen to him. I recently came across a poem that was written by Jan Richardson. We often read her work at our Lenten midweek gatherings as well as our Comfort at Christmas service. And the poem is entitled, "Those Stars That Turn in Us." And it goes, "I do not know how to keep it all together, or by what patterns this world might finally hold. What I do know is our hearts are bigger than this sky that wheels above us. And what shines through all this darkness shines through us, setting every shattered thing into a new constellation. And we can turn our faces to that light, to the grace of those stars that turn in us." I love the notion that what is shattered or broken inside each of us isn't a flaw or a defect, but rather is exactly what helps refract and reflect out God's love. It's almost like each one of us becomes a chandelier that takes one single solitary shaft of light and transforms it into 1,000 dancing, glittering rainbows of hope and love. There are so many people who feel the pressing darkness of life these days, those who struggle to find hope in the world. And it's our job to reflect God's love, to shine it in the shadowy places of this world. But the only way that we can do that, the only reason that we are able to do that is because we have Jesus, God made flesh, God's light, life, and love embodied, tentified in human form to show us the way. And so we embody the plea that is found in the words of the song that we are about to sing. Christ, be our light. Shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ, be our light. Shine in your church, gathered today. Amen.